Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into what is really one of the most powerful and, I think, controversial works of critical theory, Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed.
It's a book that doesn't just critique how we teach. It really redefines the entire concept of education as a political act.
Absolutely.
And I think when most of us hear the word education, we tend to think of something neutral, a technical process.
Mm-hmm.
You go to a school, you learn a skill, maybe it's engineering, maybe it's just basic literacy, and you receive this knowledge that's supposed to be objective.
Right. It's just about transmission. Here's the information. Now you have it.
Exactly. But that assumption of neutrality is the first thing Freire just completely dismantles.
It's the central fallacy he's attacking. He states very clearly that there is no such thing as a neutral educational process. Pedagogy, which is, the method and practice of teaching, is always an instrument of power.
Okay, so let's unpack this political view of the classroom. If it's not neutral, what are the two directions it can take? What are the paths it forces society down?
Education, for Freire, functions in one of two ways. It's either an instrument of social domination, so it reinforces the current power structure, the hierarchy, which he sees as dehumanizing.
It keeps things as they are.
Exactly. Or it functions as a practice of freedom. And that means it enables the critical transformation of that very structure. It moves us toward what he calls humanization.
So the mission for this deep dive isn't to critique individual teachers, their passion or their personal failings. We're looking at something much bigger.
We're looking at the foundational structural mechanisms.
Right. We're investigating how the system of education, its methods, its incentives, its language, is designed either to maintain the social order or, to completely disrupt it.
Precisely. It's pedagogy not as a set of classroom choices, but as a society-wide mechanism for either systemic oppression or systemic liberation.
So let's start with the man himself, Paulo Freire. His ideas were so dangerous, they actually led to his imprisonment.
They were, and he was a Brazilian educator, a philosopher, but his theories were absolutely not born in some, ivory tower.
No.
They were forged in a really painful personal struggle against material reality.
And that material reality is just so important for understanding the urgency in his writing, isn't it?
It's paramount. He often talked about living through real and concrete hunger as a child. His family was middle class, but they were wiped out during the Great Depression.
And that experience, it gave him this early, incredibly painful realization of class borders.
A deep, lifelong solidarity with the poor. He learned that hunger wasn't just, a biological fact. It was a social and political creation, a symptom of a sick system.
And this wasn't just abstract sympathy. He dedicated his life to developing methods to teach Brazilian peasants, the urban poor, how to read.
But crucially, his literacy method was never just about teaching the alphabet. It was about teaching them to use that literacy to understand and then critically transform their own world.
And that's what got him into trouble.
That's what had massive political stakes. By the early 1960s, his methods were seen as radicalizing thousands of illiterate people.
Because they treated learners not as passive objects, but as subjects who could actually inquire about their own reality.
And the authoritarian military regime saw that as a direct threat. The fact that his success led directly to his imprisonment after the 1964 coup and then a long, painful exile, it just underscores how revolutionary this was.
It wasn't just about reading words on a page.
No, it was about reading the world and realizing you could rewrite it.
So, Pedagogy of the Oppressed was written during this exile. It was his direct response to these authoritarian, dominating forms of education he saw everywhere.
Not just in Brazil, but across what he called the Third World. The book's impact was explosive. It spoke directly to all these global struggles against colonialism, against dictatorships, against illiteracy that was tied to class.
But it became this practical tool. I read that in places like South Africa during apartheid, people would risk imprisonment just to read it.
They would. They'd photocopy chapters and pass them around in secret because the book gave them a language, a critical vocabulary, to finally understand what he called their borrowed and colonized cultural existence.
That's immense. A revolutionary manual on a global scale. So if we boil it all down, what's the core philosophical conflict that made this book so threatening?
It really boils down to a conflict between two opposing models of education. First, you have the traditional hierarchical system. This is the one that reinforces the status quo. Freire calls it banking education.
Banking education. Like a bank.
Exactly like a bank. The teacher holds all the wealth, the knowledge, and they just deposit it into the passive, empty accounts of the students. And Freire argues this system is inherently dehumanizing. It reinforces oppression.
And the alternative, the practice of freedom.
That is problem-posing education. This model demands continuous critical thought, open dialogue. It's what enables collective liberation by developing what he calls critical consciousness.
And that psychological shift has a name, doesn't it?
It does, conscientese so. And that's the key. It's the process that moves the oppressed from being passive objects of a system to becoming active subjects who can transform their world.
Okay, let's really get into the mechanics of these two models, starting with the problem, the banking model.
Yeah.
Why is this idea of education as just depositing information, filling a container? Why is that so dangerous?
Freire says the banking model has a narrative character. The teacher is the only narrating subject. They just deliver these communique facts, concepts, formulas that have no connection to the students' actual lives.
They're just disembodied pieces of information.
Totally disconnected. Think of a teacher just stating 4 times 4 is 16, or the capital of Para is Belim, without ever letting the students explore the social or historical meaning of those facts.
So in that system, success just means you're good at storage and compliance.
Exactly. The better you are at accepting, memorizing, and then repeating the deposited facts, the better a student you are. The system rewards being docile.
And this is where the oppressive part comes in.
This is precisely it. The system is intentionally designed to turn people into adaptable, manageable beings. People who just accept the world as it is, who accept the reality that's been deposited in them as the absolute truth.
So it's designed to annul a student's creative power.
It minimizes or completely annuls it, and instead it stimulates credulity, just a willingness to blindly believe.
And if your creative critical power is minimized, then your ability to intervene in reality is minimized. And that, of course, serves the interests of the oppressor who doesn't want the world to be revealed or transformed.
Exactly. Freire uses this incredibly powerful, visceral language here. He calls the banking approach necrophilic.
Necrophilic. Love of death?
Love of death, of control, of mechanism. He says banking education kills life. It kills creativity. It transforms the organic, active creative people into the inorganic, into manageable, predictable, mechanical things. It is just overwhelming control over passive objects.
That sounds completely suffocating.
Yeah.
So if that system is all about static control and deposition, the alternative has to be the exact opposite. Rooted in life, creation, dynamism.
And it is. The solution is the problem-posing model, or what he also calls dialogical education. And the first thing it does is reject the teacher-student dichotomy completely.
It gets rid of that hierarchy.
It moves beyond it. A new unity emerges. Teacher-student with students-teachers.
I like that phrasing. It means no one is a total expert, and no one is a total ignoramus. Everyone involved is both learning and teaching simultaneously.
It's the essence of reciprocity. The whole process is fundamentally dialogical and co-intentional. Teachers and students become joint subjects, they're co-investigators of reality, and the world itself becomes the object of their shared inquiry.
So the goal isn't transferring information anymore.
The goal shifts entirely. It moves to acts of cognition, the critical, collective unveiling of reality.
But the word dialogue gets used so much today. Sometimes it just means, sharing your feelings in a group. Freire's version sounds much more rigorous.
Oh, it's not pleasant chit-chat. Absolutely not. Freire is crystal clear that true dialogue cannot exist without 4 foundational elements.
Okay, what are they?
Profound love for the world and for people, mutual humility so you can admit your own ignorance, intense faith in humankind's ability to create and transform, and finally, hope. A hope that's rooted in the idea that we are all incomplete beings, always moving forward.
I have to ask, though, playing the listener's proxy here, in a really polarized political meeting or even just a tense community discussion, isn't demanding profound love and faith, isn't that a bit impractical? A bit idealistic?
It's a fair question, but Freire would argue they're not idealistic add-ons. They are structural necessities for liberation.
How so?
Well, if you're fighting a system of oppression that is inherently dehumanizing, the only force that can successfully counter it is a process that is rooted in rehumanization. If you go into a dialogue without humility, you just fall back into the banking model. You're just trying to deposit your revolutionary ideas into other people's heads.
And without faith or hope?
You fall into the fatalism that keeps people trapped. So these aren't soft romantic ideals. They are the intellectual and moral foundations that prevent a revolutionary movement from just becoming another form of oppression.
Okay, so that shift from passively receiving information to actively engaging in cognition through this ethical dialogue, that's the path to what he calls praxis.
Praxis. It's the indispensable unity of reflection and action. Freire says to speak a true word, a word that is infused with both deep reflection on reality and committed action to transform it, is the very act of transforming the world.
So what happens if you have one without the other? If you reflect and reflect but never act?
That's what he calls verbalism. It's just idle chatter. It's alienated, blah, as he puts it, theory that is completely disconnected from any material consequence.
And the other side of that coin, action without any reflection.
That's activism. Action for action's sake. And it's just as dangerous because it's disconnected from its theoretical roots. It can lead to just using the old banking methods, propaganda, slogans, manipulation, but in the name of liberation, which of course just creates a new kind of tyranny.
You need both, a constant dialectical interplay.
For authentic human existence, yes.
And this union of reflection and action, this praxis, is the mechanism for achieving the main psychological and political goal, conscientization.
Conscientization. It's one of the most vital concepts in the book. It's the process of learning to perceive social, political, and economic contradictions and then taking transformative action against them.
It's critical awareness of your reality and the systemic reasons it is the way it is.
And he describes this as a move from a submerged consciousness to an emergent consciousness.
What does a submerged consciousness look like?
In that state, the oppressed person sees reality as dense, impenetrable, and enveloping. The world is just the way it is. It's static. They might blame their situation on bad luck or their neighbors or even themselves. They don't see the constructed systemic nature of their oppression.
So conscientization is that moment of clarity, the aha moment when you see the matrix.
It's the critical awareness that the contradiction exists and that change is not only possible but necessary. And importantly, Freire argues this doesn't lead to destructive fanaticism. It actually enrolls people in the search for self-affirmation, for becoming responsible subjects in history.
Which brings us to the ultimate goal, liberation. But he's very clear this isn't something one person can achieve alone or that can be given to you.
It is absolutely not a gift bestowed by revolutionary leaders or the intellectual elite. It has to be a mutual process forged with the oppressed.
And he points out a fundamental danger here, doesn't he? That the oppressed, having been conditioned by this system, might just want to switch places with the oppressor.
It's a tragic paradox. They might aspire to get the land just to become the new boss or to become a new tyrant. They internalize the very ideal of manhood or success that's been modeled for them by the oppressor.
Can you talk more about that internalization? It seems to be the crux of the problem.
It is. They internalize the image and the guidelines of the oppressor. So they have this fundamental duality. They are simultaneously themselves and the oppressor living inside their head. And they develop a fear of freedom.
A fear of freedom. That sounds counterintuitive.
But freedom requires responsibility and autonomy. Two things they have been systematically denied, so they fear it. Their ideal of a successful person becomes an identification with the power and possessive consciousness of the oppressor. Breaking that is a profound internal struggle.
This is what he calls the painful childbirth.
Exactly. The goal isn't just to flip the roles. The goal is the humanization of all people. It's a painful birth that results in a new kind of being, neither oppressor nor oppressed. And to do that, you have to transform the objective reality, the social system that created the contradiction in the first place.
Which is why education is so essential. It gives you the critical tools for that dual transformation, both outside in society and inside your own head.
You can't have one without the other.
All right, now let's map this theory onto the system itself. Freire argues the oppressive educational system is basically a mirror of oppressive society. Let's start with the specific actors who maintain this structure.
Okay. First, you have the oppressors. Freire says they're characterized by a strongly possessive consciousness. It's this relentless drive to transform everything, the earth, property, other people, even time, into an object of their domination.
Their being is measured by their having.
Precisely. They fear losing their ability to oppress because that's the only kind of freedom they understand. They need to convert their subjective desires into objective reality for everyone else.
And on the other side, we have the oppressed who, as you said, internalize this image.
And that internalization creates this duality, this fear of freedom. True freedom for them requires ejecting that internal oppressor, embracing autonomy, taking responsibility, and that is terrifying. A prescribed, dependent life, even a miserable one, can feel safer than the radical uncertainty of real freedom.
Which explains that tragic observation he makes about people who manage to climb the ladder a little bit within the oppressive system.
It explains it perfectly. He notes that it's a rare peasant promoted to overseer who doesn't become more of a tyrant than the owner himself.
Why is that?
Because the oppressive context hasn't changed. To secure his own fragile position, he feels he has to internalize the role of being tough and controlling. He identifies with the powerful, not with the powerless people he just left behind.
So let's look at the incentives of this system. It's all built for efficiency and compliance, right? To adapt people to a preset reality.
Adaptation is the central goal. Banking education exists to make individuals better fit for the world the oppressors have created. The majority have to adapt to the purposes that the dominant minority sets for them.
So you're not trained to question why the assembly line exists. You're just trained to be a more efficient cog in it.
Exactly. And the mechanism for forcing this adaptation is explicitly designed to obviate thinking.
To prevent thinking.
Absolutely. Things like purely verbalistic lessons, reading requirements that have no connection to the students' lives, rigid exams that just reward memorization, keeping an emotional distance between teacher and student. All of it is designed to minimize critical thought.
If you're busy memorizing and repeating facts, you're not busy analyzing structural inequality.
You don't have the time or the tools.
Okay, moving on to the narratives. How do the oppressors manage perception? How do they make this unequal system seem natural or even fair?
They do it by mythicizing reality. It's a deliberate process of hiding the contradictions and presenting the world as fixed, static, unchangeable. This myth-making is essential for what Freire calls the culture of silence.
And he lists some very specific, powerful myths that get deposited through this banking system. Let's go through some of the big ones that are still so relevant today.
The first, and maybe the most foundational, is the myth that the oppressive social order is actually a free society.
Which is crucial, because if you believe society is already free, then anyone who struggles in dissent must be the problem. They're just chaotic or morally wrong.
Right. Then there's the myth that anyone who is industrious can become an entrepreneur. This is the classic bootstrap narrative. It places all the blame for poverty squarely on the individual's lack of effort, not on systemic barriers.
And that feeds right into the next myth, the laziness or dishonesty of the oppressed, which is contrasted with the inherent superiority of the oppressor.
Exactly. And maybe the most insidious myth, especially for education, is the myth of the universal right of education.
How is that a myth?
Because it masks the reality of educational stratification. Freire points out that of all the children who start primary school, only a tiny fraction ever reach the university. The system promises universal access, but it delivers selectively, reinforcing class divisions. And then it blames those who drop out for their supposed lack of aptitude.
It's a perfect self-preserving system. Now let's get into the concrete mechanisms of control, the anti-dialogical actions that make sure these narratives stick.
Well, the overarching result is the culture of silence. The whole banking system is a major instrument for keeping the dispossessed in this state, submerged, unable to form a critical response. Their only recourse might be despair or self-destructive behavior because they don't have the language to name the source of their pain.
And this silence is enforced by prescription.
Prescription. The imposition of one person's choice upon another. The behavior of the oppressed is a prescribed behavior. They follow the guidelines of the oppressor. Freedom, on the other hand, requires autonomy and choice.
And to stop people from uniting, the system relies on hierarchy and anti-dialogics.
The theory of anti-dialogical action, which is all about conquest and domination, has four main characteristics. The first is conquest, the drive to turn people into objects.
The second is divide and rule.
Keep the people divided. Create minor conflicts, petty jealousies, keep them in their silos. Because if they achieve unity and organization, they become a threat.
We see that everywhere, pitting one group of workers against another, one generation against the next.
And the third is manipulation. This is about leading the masses to believe they're acting on their own behalf when they're really just following the script of the dominant class. And the fourth is cultural invasion.
What's that?
That's where the oppressors impose their own worldview, their own values on the oppressed, until the oppressed come to believe that their own culture and history are inferior.
It's a complete system. And the banking model is just the educational packaging for all these techniques. Instead of guns, they use grades and a standardized curriculum to achieve the same end, control.
Objectification of the human being.
And this is where Freire's work, written over half a century ago, feels so predictive. Let's connect this to modern educational realities.
The connections are shockingly direct. We have to start with the technocratic trap. This is standardized testing, modern management models, the obsession with measurable output.
The focus on data.
The focus on data. Modern educational systems, especially in the US and the UK, are so heavily informed by these positivistic management models. The whole thing gets reduced to a technical exercise. It's about deposition and measurable compliance. The goal is the output, the perfect score on the test, not the radical process of cognition.
So the student is basically managed like an asset on a spreadsheet.
And this reinforces the very passivity that oppression requires. It encourages a mechanical approach to life. Memory is what counts, not genuine experience or creativity. It's a very efficient system for sorting people into predictable roles in society.
And that passivity feeds directly into the second big implication, civic apathy and political disengagement.
Absolutely. When the whole system is designed to obviate thinking, to anesthetize people, then critical intervention in reality becomes almost impossible.
Freire talked about manipulation being used to give people an illusion of acting through others, like identify with a charismatic leader.
Exactly. The people become masses which can be manipulated because they've been denied their own reflective participation. They come to believe that the leader's action is their action.
Which creates a really dangerous dynamic.
It does. Their political energy, their rage, gets channeled into submission to a powerful figure who promises easy answers. And this allows the dominant elites to condemn any real grassroots collective action like a worker strike as dangerous chaos, while they call on the state to use violence to enforce their own order.
But Freire does offer a powerful counterexample to all this top-down control. And that's his model of community-based learning, his thematic investigation.
This is where his message really comes alive. Thematic investigation is where educators, as co-investigators, start with the people's actual concrete situation, the generative themes of their life, housing, poverty, healthcare, and they pose those themes back to the people as a problem to be analyzed.
So the learning moves from abstract facts to concrete reality. Tell us about the culture circles and the process of decoding.
Yes. In these culture circles, people critically analyze codifications, which can be a drawing, a photo, any representation of their lived situation. It's about creating just enough distance from their reality so they can see it critically.
And there's that famous anecdote in the book about the tenement residents discussing a sketch of a drunken man.
A very powerful example. At first, their immediate submerged perception was just to repeat the societal myth. He's just a good-for-nothing drunk.
They internalized the blame.
They did. But when the facilitator pressed them to analyze the codification dialogically, to ask why he was drinking, the conversation completely shifted.
They started to perceive the contradiction.
They did. They collectively realized that the drunk man in the picture was often the only one with a job, the only one who was productive. And they concluded that he drank to escape the humiliation of low wages and exploitation. The dialogue externalized the cause. It transformed an individual failing into a social problem.
And that move, from just feeling the problem to analyzing its systemic cause, that is the heart of conscientizo in action.
Precisely. It's what Freire calls the perception of their previous perception. By seeing their reality objectified in that drawing, they move from a passive view to a critical one. They start to see the untested feasibility of changing their situation.
This whole idea of critical pedagogy has been so influential, but it also gets a ton of pushback, especially from institutions. Let's talk about the debates over critical pedagogy.
Well, in open and democratic societies, like the United States, Freire's work has often suffered from a very sophisticated form of censorship. Omission.
Just not teaching it.
Just not teaching it. It's still entirely possible to get a PhD in education from a major university and never once read Pedagogy of the Oppressed.
Which is in itself a form of selective censorship. You ensure the next generation of educators and policymakers simply remains uninformed about this entire framework.
And even when his work is included, it's often distorted. We see dialogue misinterpreted as a mere technique or just as group therapy.
Just sharing personal stories without connecting them to power.
Right. It becomes an overdose of experiential celebration. You share your trauma, but you never rigorously connect it to structural power, to history, to agency.
Which sounds like a very comfortable way for institutions to feel like they're addressing inequality without actually doing the hard work of structural change. It becomes performative.
It is performative. And Freire would call that form of dialogue just another form of verbalism, reflection without the commitment to action.
Because true dialogue isn't just a conversation.
It's a radical epistemological relationship, a way of knowing. It requires intense intellectual struggle with the object of knowledge, and it demands that unity between theory and practice.
Finally, we have to address the biggest critique leveled at Freire, that he intervenes by teaching the oppressed about their oppression, that he violates educational neutrality.
And Freire meets this critique head-on by rejecting the very idea of neutrality. He defends his position as a necessary ethical intervention rooted in political clarity.
He doesn't pull any punches.
He says, I must intervene in teaching the peasants that their hunger is socially constructed, and work with them to help identify those responsible for this social construction, which is, in my view, a crime against humanity. For Freire, education is always political. If you try to be neutral, you're simply siding with the dominant power structure by letting the oppression continue.
So this whole discussion fundamentally challenges the story we're told about knowledge. Let's connect this back to our show's broader theme, how knowledge reinforces power.
The dominant elites absolutely use that academic selective selection, the omission of critical voices like Freire, to sanitize the curriculum. They secure the intellectual status quo. The oppressed can't fight a system they don't have the language to name.
And the control isn't just over who gets read, it's over the language itself. The source material gives a stunning look at how terminology is used to obscure reality.
It does. Freire's collaborators point out these linguistic distortions. For example, why is it totally acceptable in academic and policy circles to use euphemisms like disenfranchised or under-resourced?
But precise, critical terms like oppression or praxis are dismissed as jargon.
Exactly. And calling oppression jargon isn't an accident. It's a tactical, ideological move. It frames the concept as something abstract, something only radical academics talk about. And that makes the actual power dynamic invisible to the very people living it.
It's a way to disarm the vocabulary of liberation.
It is. When you say the oppressed, you're forced to ask, well, who is the oppressor? The language reveals the agent. But if you say the disenfranchised, there's no agent. It leaves the door wide open to blaming the victim.
So the political struggle is waged not just over resources, but over the dictionary. And this brings us right back to that central premise, when neutrality becomes domination.
The central premise of the whole book. Education is either an instrument for conformity or a practice of freedom. There is no neutral middle ground. Any attempt to occupy that space automatically benefits the status quo.
In that assumption of a neutral view from nowhere that so many academics and politicians claim to have.
Is actually impossible. According to Freire, it's just a projection. It's globalizing the local, dominant, ethnocentric values and pretending they're universal.
The moment you refuse to intervene in a dehumanizing situation, that refusal itself serves the oppressor.
To pretend the classroom exists outside the political economy is to willfully ignore its most profound function.
Which transforms our entire understanding of education, making it an undeniable site of political struggle.
The revolutionary process itself is a pedagogical action. The word pedagogy comes from the Greek for to lead a child. It is inherently directive. So he argues it must always be directed toward humanization. It can't wait.
So education can't wait until after the revolution is won. It has to be part of the struggle itself.
It's an indispensable element. Any revolutionary leadership that tries to use the banking method, that says we'll postpone dialogue until after we take power, they just risk becoming the new oppressive bureaucracy.
So true revolutionary praxis has to be a unity between leaders and the people acting together.
In unshakable solidarity, the process of liberation is the process of learning to be free, and that learning has to be dialogical from the very first step.
Freire's analysis is just relentless in its political clarity, but his ultimate vision is so profoundly humanistic. He really helps us see that the choice in education, and really in how we live our lives, is stark.
It is. One path leads to dehumanization for everyone, even for the oppressor who lives in constant fear. And the other path leads to the recovery of our shared humanity.
And his crucial insight is that this struggle for humanization, to be subjects who act on the world instead of objects acted upon, that's our ontological vocation.
Our purpose as beings. And it's possible because dehumanization, while it's a concrete historical fact, is not our destiny. We are incomplete beings, and our destiny is to search for a more complete humanity.
And the primary mechanism for that search, the way we name the world and transform it through praxis, is authentic dialogue.
A dialogue that requires those foundational qualities of love, humility, faith, and hope. If a movement for liberation loses that dialogical quality, if it becomes mechanical or bureaucratic, it just risks repeating the very patterns of domination it fought to replace. It has to be sustained forever.
Which brings us to the final, really provocative challenge Freire leaves us with. If the ultimate goal isn't just to reverse the roles, not to create new tyrants or new forms of banking education, but to establish a pedagogy of all people in the process of permanent liberation, what does that require of us?
Individually and collectively, yeah. What does it take to sustain that authentic, unending dialogue even after the revolution has won?
It forces us to ask, are we prepared to continuously dismantle the oppressor that is housed within ourselves?
Because if we ever stop being subjects in a constant process of critical self-reflection and action, we risk becoming objects of our own success. We risk perpetuating new forms of the very oppression we fought to overcome. The fight for humanization is never truly finished. It has to become a permanent, living condition.
A profound thought to carry forward as you look at your own daily interactions and the structures that shape them. We have been exploring the foundational text Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. We encourage you to read the book yourself, support the author, or borrow it from your local library.
It's an essential read.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
And if you enjoy systems-level analysis like this, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.